The great Mark Cuban once said, "Business happens over years and years. Value is measured in the total upside of a business relationship, not by how much you squeezed out in any one deal." And we couldn't agree more. This is the Business Development Podcast, based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and broadcasting to the world. You'll get expert business development advice, tips and experiences, and you'll hear interviews with business owners, CEOs, and business development reps. You'll get actionable advice on how to grow business. Brought to you by Capital Business Development, capitalbd.ca. Let's do it. Welcome to the Business Development Podcast. And now your expert host, Kelly Kennedy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 55 of the Business Development Podcast. Wow, 55. It still blows my mind. I look back, it's only been 6 months. We have really just celebrated 6 months. We're like 6 months and a week on the Business Development Podcast. And it's so crazy to have been part of the progression of this show, along with you, our lovely listeners, because the reality is the show is nothing without you, and I appreciate it so much. I appreciate all of the kind messages, all of the emails, the reach outs, the thank yous, the inspirations, just letting me know how this show has affected your life and how it's improved both you and your businesses that you represent. And it's just so freaking cool. It is so cool, my Business Development Podcast community. I'm so thankful for each and every one of you. Thank you so much for showing up week over week and joining me on this adventure, because that's what it really is. The Business Development Podcast is an adventure. While I'm sharing, my experiences and lessons with you, and you guys are equally sharing your experiences and lessons back with me, and I appreciate it so much. And I love to be here with you. I love to do this week over week. And today I decided I'm going to do it. We're going to talk about me. We're going to talk about my adventure. We're going to talk about the path of Kelly Kennedy that led him to this microphone. And I think it'll be really fun. And I'm going to actually title this episode A Love Letter to BD, because that's really what it is. I love business development. I truly am incredibly thankful for the opportunities that were presented to me that led me down this path to get me into a business development role, and for me to be able to grow and grow and grow in that role year over year, for over the last decade plus. Like it's crazy to see the progression, and you will each experience your own progression. And I'm sure one day you'll be in a similar situation looking back and realizing that every step you took along the way led you here. And you don't choose BD, BD chooses you. And it's always a cool moment when you recognize that that's really what happened. Anyways, before we kick off today's episode and we go down that long rabbit hole of a story, I wanted to give a gigantic thank you to Justin Dionorine. He was our expert guest for last Sunday's episode. His episode was episode 54, Listen to Your Employees with Justin Dionorine. And Justin, it was absolutely amazing having you on chatting organizational psychology. I know you educated not just me, but all of our listeners, and we are all incredibly grateful. And thank you for the amazing tips for employee retention and to benefit the employees of each one of our companies. That was amazing. So once again, big thank you to Justin. Thanks for coming on the show. All right, well, let's jump into it. So let's go back quite a few years now. Goodness, I'm thinking back on the dates, and it's like, I'm 34 years old. I'll be turning 35 this December. And I really started this journey in my life when I was actually 17 years old. And when I was 17, I grew up in a city outside of Edmonton. I grew up in a city called Spruce Grove, Alberta, Canada. And it's a small city. There's not a ton of people. I don't know the exact census, but I would say not more than probably 50,000 people. Might be a little more now, but back then it was quite small when you really consider it in the grand scheme of things. And we had like a handful of car dealerships. And I know when I was in high school, we wanted to work at the car dealership because, of course, we get to play around with all these sweet new cars is what we all thought, right? And I eventually had a friend from school start working there and kind of gave me a lead in. I remember dropping a handful of resumes and I got a job working on the lot, parking cars at the local Dodge dealership in Spruce Grove back then. And that was a really cool experience. And I did that throughout all of high school. And it was awesome because, it was pretty straightforward. You had to go out, you had to park cars, you had to pull cars around, clean them up, that sort of thing. But I learned how to really, really basically I learned the insides of each one of these vehicles, and I really learned the ins and outs of understanding a product. And what I didn't realize then was that's what I was kind of being groomed to do, was to understand products, understand the values, the features, the things that make them great. And really, what it ended up doing was priming me real well for eventually trying my hand at selling some of these cars when I was older. And so I ended up working at Grove Dodge all through high school. And I remember I was just about 18 and I went and talked to the sales manager of the store. And I remember asking him, hey, I'm almost 18. I know these cars inside and out. I probably know them better than half the salespeople on this lot. Would you be open to me trying my hand at sales? And he was a bit of a joking guy. He was a funny guy. I'm not going to name him because some people may still know him, but he was a really good dude. He was a little bit different, but a good dude. And I remember he looked at me and just kind of gave me this silly grin and said, you know what, Cal? No, I'm not going to hire you because you have zero sales experience. And he was right. I didn't have anything at that time. And he said, though, if you go out and you go do something else for a little while, go try your hand doing sales somewhere else, come back in 6 months and I'll give you a try. And so this is 18 and I'm like, okay, why not? So I literally the next week I went out and I ended up getting a job at a electronics store, a major electronics store in Edmonton, working as a salesperson in the audio video section. And my gosh, I remember kind of going back there. I was chatting with Dale a little bit about it in one of my previous episodes because, it's a lot of years now for me. Like this is really like the beginning of flat screen TVs was kind of that time. So it's kind of dating me a little bit. But I remember kind of working there and I was just a young punk learning how it works, learning how to talk to people. But I remember watching the top salespeople at that store and they were vicious. And I mean vicious. Like you couldn't beat them to the person coming in the door. And these people, I kid you not, like this would have been, probably 2008, somewhere in there, 2008, 2000. Yeah, I want to say 2008. 2007, 2008, something like that. And these people were selling over $100,000 a year. They were making over $100,000 a year selling TVs at that time, but they were absolutely vicious. And they would talk to everyone. They had no fear. And you could always tell the younger salespeople because they're just reluctant to even want to go and talk to people. And it's so funny because that was even me. I look at me back then and I was not the guy that I am today. And while I wouldn't consider myself a shark by any means, I definitely don't have the fear to go and talk to people like I did then. And we talk about this, I've always struggled a little bit with anxiety. And so when you're kind of dealing with the fear of anxious situations or conversations, sometimes that holds you back. I know for a lot of the beginning of my career, I had to work to overcome that. But yeah, even in that time, I remember watching them and they were just vicious with regards to how they would, go out and because they were working on commission and they would talk to absolutely everybody, but they would close stupid amounts of deals. And, I remember watching them just thinking like it seems sleazy at the time, but it's like, I look back now and they were just making their living, but they were bloody good at it and they knew exactly what to do and they knew how to do it right. And, I think I learned a lot into my future by watching them and understanding that you need to have communication. You need to have effective communication with people to build a relationship, to build a rapport, and then to sell your product or service. But people want that connection first. And that was something that back then I really didn't understand. And I think a lot of people struggle to understand that. We like to think that people ultimately buy a product, right? And while that is true, while most likely they have bought the product, they're also buying the experience. They're buying the trust. They're buying it from you. The reality is if people can buy something from you and buy something from someone else, if they like you, they're probably going to go buy it from you. And that was something that took me time to learn throughout my business development career. But I did learn it in time. But that was something that I really did not understand back then. But anyways, I digress. I then did my time there. I must have worked at that electronics store for probably about a year. I think I gave it a little longer than 6 months. So the time had come and I made my way back to Dodge. And I went and chatted with the sales manager once again and said, hey, okay, I've done my time. I would like to try my hand back here in a product that I think I really understand and could work well with. And yeah, at the time I was offered the position. I started the next week, and then one of the that would essentially be my key mark. I kind of think about that as the entrance into my business development time. And even though my time doing this was very short, and I'll explain why as we keep going, it eventually led me down a path that took me to business development. But I'm not sure that had I not went back at this time and did my time and learned sales, like truly learned sales and customer negotiation and customer interaction, whether or not I would have ended up on my BD career. But I sucked at car sales. I'm just gonna say that right off the bat. Car sales was definitely not the business for me. And back then things were different. It was hard. It was pushy. It was, you have to close a deal on the spot. And that was really hard negotiation. And to this day, I hate that kind of sales, and I would never end up in that kind of sales again. That for me is just not the type of sales that I would ever want to find myself back in. It's tough, and you know what I mean? If that's your lot and that's the kind of sales that you're doing and it's really on the spot pressure sales, and power to you. I get it. You have a family to feed, but you wouldn't find me back in it. Not after knowing what I know and doing my time. But I worked doing that for quite some time, probably about 6 or 8 months yet again. I know that we were heading into 2009. So for those of you old enough to remember, 2008, 2009 had a absolutely horrible financial crisis. Basically, the United States housing market absolutely collapsed and took the world with it. And at that time, my gosh, people couldn't get loans. That's what happened. We had people coming in and they couldn't get loans. The banks were not willing to take any risks. The requirements for loans went through the roof. And so even if you got people that really, really wanted a vehicle, unless they had the top notchest of credit or a huge down payment, a lot of these companies were not willing to loan them any money. And so working commission at a car lot at that time, yeah, you know what? I went hungry for a little while, as most did. And I think at that time, probably half to 3/4 of the salespeople ended up leaving that business. It was brutal, to say the least. It was a brutal time. And only, the ones that stayed were those ones that had been there forever and had that repeat business, those people coming back to them over and over and over again. But that was the lesson learned. That was the lesson that I learned from this experience. If you build great relationships with people, they will come back over and over and over again, even if it's years down the line. Those relationships will follow you. And so the reason that only the best salespeople at that car lot made it through that crisis was they had a backlog of customers who loved them, who loved dealing with them, who trusted them, who built a relationship and a rapport with them. And that took them into the next level. So I didn't necessarily realize that at the time, but hindsight now, 100%, that was a lesson to be learned from that situation. So anyways, that crisis ended up happening and I ended up leaving that. And what I went into after that was I went into parts sales, parts sales at a very well-known Edmonton remanufacturing company. And I did that for a lot of years, and there were some really great people there. I think I ended up working there for about 4 years total. Maybe not quite 4 years, but definitely 3. And I worked with a lot of really great people. It was an older company. There were lots of the older generation that had been there 30 years retiring, but learned a lot about phone conversations, how to discuss with people, how to ask the right questions, which at the time, once again, didn't realize. But I guess the hindsight is that every one of these interactions taught me lessons that made me very, very great at business development when that time finally came. But there were absolutely a ton of phone interactions, a lot of repeat customers, lots of accounts that we managed that would just call us or call one specific person and ask for whatever parts they needed. And we would ship them over to their various businesses across the city. And yeah, I really enjoyed that job. And I you know what? That was also where I learned to appreciate good management. There was a couple managers at that company that, they were very old then, and I don't even know if they're with us anymore, but they were absolutely great people. And I learned then that you can manage a company very well without being a total a-hole. And if there was kind of a lesson to be taken away from that, they taught me the type of manager that I would like to be, which has made me a great business owner. It has made me great at dealing with employees, because I recognized early on that you don't have to be what or treat people horribly to get great results, right? And there are always ways to have a conversation if you're not getting the results that you wanted. And so yeah, to this day, I still owe probably the manager and the business owner that I am today to those managers, and I appreciate them greatly. So I ended up doing that for a little bit, and then I forget what ended up happening. I left that business and I ended up going to a different parts company down the line. And this was heading pretty well right into around 2010. And around that time, same thing. I forget what was going on, but there was definitely a bit of a recession going on. There was a lot of cost cutting, and I remember that I ended up getting laid off from that position. And not really knowing quite what to do, a silly turn of events, I ended up going into armed guard work for a little while. And yeah, it sounded kind of cool. I loved going to the gun range and shooting guns. And it's something that me and my family have done for many, many, many years. I grew up on farms and had cousins that had guns. And so, yeah, it seemed like a really neat path. And I ended up doing that for a bit. And, I did that for probably about 8 months. And I had a very close friend pass away very quickly, very unexpectedly. And it threw me for a total loop. I was very young at this point. I want to say that I was around 20 years old. And I just, I wasn't really sure what to do with my life. And I know, like, at that moment, I was really thinking, like, I can't do this. I remember having a real fear that if I continued to do this, like, I was going to die. Like, I genuinely felt, I think it just had a lot to do with that situation in that moment. And I just thought, this wasn't for me. And so I quit that job. And I remember sitting around thinking, what the heck am I going to do now? And my sister had just went to college, and she goes, look, Kelly, it's time. You're almost, at the time, I think I was 21 at this point. I think she goes, you're 21 years old. You haven't figured out what you're going to do with your life. So to this day, I still owe my sister a gigantic thank you for giving me a swift kick in the butt and sending me off to college, because I'm not sure that I would have done it otherwise. And I remember going there, and I'm sitting in the enrollment center, and they're asking, well, like, what would you like to go for? And I was like, well, I know I want to go for business, because I've been doing sales forever, and I think I just really want to get out of sales. Like, I'm gonna take business. I'm gonna just go run operations somewhere and do the day to day, and I won't have to fall back on this silly sales stuff that I've been in absolutely forever since I was, at this point, 18, right? And in my mind, it's so naive how Kelly was thinking at this time. But I was literally just thinking, like, oh yeah, I'll just go and I'll just end up in some type of business thing that has nothing to do with this, and I won't have to deal with people, and I can just sit in a room and crunch numbers or make business decisions. This is literally what was going through my head at 21. I knew nothing about business, obviously. And so I ended up at a local community college and taking business courses. And my gosh, yeah, that year absolutely flew by, and came out, had a diploma in business admin, and ended up shopping for jobs. Same thing, just looking for like an operations job. And there was a position that came up at a local inspection firm that was relatively new. And I think at the time they were only a year and a half old, like very, very, very new. And so I ended up applying for this job and got interviewed by a very new business owner. And he was talking about my experience and was interested in my past in sales and thought that we might be able to help. And that was it. Once I got hired, I actually got hired for a business admin position. But very, very quickly, the reality that I was incredibly good at interacting with customers kind of started to come forward. And, I wasn't there for more than a month, and I had doubled my salary. I kid you not. I think I came into that position at like something like 15, 16 bucks an hour just looking for work experience. And within 1 month, I was over $30 an hour at this position. That's just how effective that I ended up being right off the bat. And yeah, so that was it. That was, back in the early 2010s, right? And we had some really crazy years, and I learned a lot in that time. And I was cutting my teeth on business development and operations at the same time. It was kind of a bit of a dual role where I was trying to not only close the positions, but then also, facilitate the onboarding and the positioning of these people at the various locations that they needed us on. And yeah, I ended up staying at that company for a little over 9 years as an employee, and then a whole nother year as a contractor when I started Capital Business Development. And, I one day will spend a little more time, I think, talking about that time. But, I owe that man, my career, frankly. I really do. And I appreciate him greatly. And I don't think he necessarily listens to this show, but if he ever does, I hope he listens to this episode because, the reality is I would not be the person I am today without the opportunities that was presented to me by that position in that company. And I would not have found my love for business development in the way that I have found it. And the reason that this show is so critically important to me is really that I truly love business development. Business development came out of nowhere. It chose me even when I was trying to run from it. I think about that as kind of funny, a little bit ironic sometimes, that I literally went to school to get away from essentially sales, but yeah, business development and ended up loving it more than ever. Ended up back in a position and recognizing that, frankly, it is one of the best positions in any company, bar none, period. It is truly a game-changing position. Every company needs somebody out there advocating for it. And without business development, companies just don't make it. And it's just such a crazy, cool position to be in when you recognize, the impact that you have on a business, frankly, is not greater in any other position than business development. Business development has such a high level impact on the success or failure of any business. And when done correctly, it can be exponentially valuable. And I mean that exponentially, 10x, 20x, depending on the contracts that you bring in for the businesses you're working on, depending on the relationships that you generate and create. They truly mean, they are the difference between whether a business makes it or fails. Good business development. That's really it. And obviously, yes, you have to have your operations. It all has to go right. But I think we have to assume that most businesses would not exist if they could not actually achieve, the goal of their business, right? If they could not provide their core service. So without business development, that core service can never happen. Those relationships are never generated. And it is just truly special. It has a very special place in my heart. And I want to just talk to all my business development people because I know you're listening. I know that this show specifically you're listening to. And I want you to know that, my gosh, I value and appreciate each and every one of you. And you guys should all be honored to be in the position that you are, because your company could not make it without you guys. Truly, you guys are the knights in shining armor of your businesses. And I want you to know that I value each and every one of you. And, I'm with you. I really am. I really believe in what you're doing. And I'm grateful that you come here for advice on a weekly basis. And I truly hope that I'm able to provide that week over week over week. And I hope even out of this one, you get a little bit of value. But I really do want you to know that you are special. Your business could not do it without you. You are a key, integral part of whatever business you work at. And if you're the business owner, same thing. You are key, and you are probably doing the business development if you're listening to this show. And it is critical. It is critical that you spend the time and you learn how. But the reality is, I'm proud of you. You wouldn't, people that don't succeed don't listen to shows like this. They're not trying to find a better way. They're not trying to better themselves. And the reality is, if you're listening to this show, that's what you're trying to do. And it's absolutely amazing to be here for you and to be able to do this with you. And I just want to thank you for joining me on this adventure. And I hope that I can continue to do it with you for a very, very, very long time. So I've long believed that business development is the best job in any company. And even after years of running my own business and knowing the headaches that go along with that, I think I still believe that. Even though it's a business development firm and I still actively do business development along with my employee, the reality is that the business development is still the best part of the job. It really is. Being able to get out there and make those connections and have those lunches and have a laugh and introduce new products and, really, really improve people's businesses and lives. is pretty hard to beat. It is pretty hard to beat. And I think today I was kind of trying to look back and think of all the different jobs and positions and life lessons that I learned along the way that got me into this life of business development. But, the reality is it all got me here. Every life choice that I made led me to this path that I'm on. And just like for each and every one of you, every life choice that you have had has led you to this business development career or business ownership or entrepreneurship or whatever venture that you are on right now. And we all have to be thankful for the journey. And I think it's important too to think that if you're struggling right now, if you are going through struggle, if your business is struggling, if maybe you're struggling to close deals or whatever, remember, it's this point in your life is just another step in the long journey. And one day you'll look back and you'll be like, yes, okay, I see the lesson that I was supposed to learn here, or I see the good in this situation. And so if you are struggling right now, understand that you're only going to be struggling for a moment. And one day you'll be able to look back at this struggle and recognize that it was a key point in your life lessons of path. And things do tend to get better over time. So what are some of the benefits of being in business development? Let's talk about it. Let's shout from the rooftops. We're BD people, right? We get to drive company growth. Really, what's more critical in any business, period? Tell me, because I can't think of anything more important than the growth of your company. Because if you're not growing, you're probably dying or you're struggling. And we need to be moving it to growth. Business development people are key drivers in business growth. Effective business development grows companies, period. We get to make connections that last a lifetime. Think about this. Yeah, sure, you have connections at your various businesses that you work at, but you may not be at the business you're at forever, and they most likely will not be at the business they're at forever, but those connections stay. I still have friends that I worked with in those 10 years when I worked at the inspection firm that are still just absolutely amazing people that I absolutely still love to go grab lunch with sometimes and just shoot the shit and reconnect. And if they end up starting at companies that I can service or that one of my customers can service, that connection is still there and I can call out to them at any time. I can set up meetings with them at any time. Those connections follow you and they follow you for a lifetime. And some of them will be friendships for a lifetime. And I can't really put a price on that. It's critical that, your relationships in business are absolutely everything. And business development gives you the power to build incredibly strong, great relationships over time. You get to be involved in corporate direction. I don't know about you guys, but when I worked at that other business, I was involved in any type of corporate direction meeting. So you get the high level picture about what's going on in any organization. What are the goals? What are the new ventures? What are the new plans? What are the revenue goals? You get to not just know, but participate in the forward movement of a company. And heck, that makes for a great story. It really does, I watched that little inspection firm grow from this tiny, tiny inspection firm making no more than $300,000 a year in their first couple of years to within 4 years making over $6 million and becoming a leading inspection organization, not just in Edmonton, but in Canada as a whole. That was pretty freaking impressive. And I got to be involved in every part of that. And so I got to learn those lessons as well, which was absolutely amazing and has helped me greatly in the growth of my own company. I talked about it just there. You get to be involved in the organization at the highest levels. Most BD people work directly with the owners of the business or the highest level directors in the business. So you get to know things that not everyone gets to know. You get to learn about the direction. You get to learn about corporate priorities. You get to learn about all sorts of things. You get to make really great connections in the organizations you work at. That's pretty tough to beat in any position. You get a balanced work schedule. I know I'm not speaking to all my BD people. I get it. Not all of you get a balanced work schedule, but most of you do. I would argue that most of you are probably working a pretty cushy 9-to-5 job most days. And yeah, you get to go home to your families most nights. And I get it. Yeah, there's nights you're on the road or there's nights you're at trade shows or whatever else. I get it. But the reality is that most of the time you get a very normal life with a really great job to boot. And that's pretty tough to beat. That is really tough to beat. There's a lot of people working a hell of a lot harder than your BD people for their money, and they don't get to go home to their families at night. So you need to be thankful for that as well. We get to travel, right? We get to travel. BD people get to travel, and it's friggin' awesome. I get it. Not all travel's great. If you travel too much, it sucks. And I know this is hard to understand if you're talking to people that don't travel much. You look at us and think that we're flying all over the place and life's fine and dandy. But no, it's not always fine and dandy. And, I work with people that travel 90,000, 100,000 kilometers of flight time per year. They hate it. They absolutely hate it. And I feel bad for them because I get it. That would suck. But most of us get a light travel, right? We're not going that far. So we get to see parts of the country that maybe other people wouldn't. We get to take drives that other people wouldn't. We get opportunities to learn, which I'm going to do an entire show on about the stuff you can learn during car rides and maximizing those trips. But yes, travel. We get to travel and see different places and meet new people as part of the position. And that's pretty cool. We get personal growth. And what do I mean by this? Yeah, I get it. All companies, for the most part, provide some type of training or might send you to a seminar here and there. But what I'm talking about is the kind of personal growth that makes you a better person. Yes. So we talk about this show all the time, right? And I talk about my struggles, right? My struggles with social anxiety and you'd never know it, right? I was funny. I was talking with Edmonton Chamber not that long ago, and the conversation came up and Ken called me out and he goes, "Well, you don't really look like that much of an introvert." And it's true. I'm sure on the face of it, I don't look that way, but that's after years and years and years of personal development that I got on the job working in business development, learning to handle high anxiety situations and overcome them. And it has made me better, not just in business development, but in any high social anxiety thing in my life. It could be a wedding, it could be anywhere that before would have caused me a lot of struggle. Now I'm fine. And that was through personal growth that I got to have on the job, being in business development and overcoming my personal fears and anxieties. And it makes me better each and every time. And I owe that to business development. You get to help companies accomplish their highest goals. Right? Companies don't grow without business development. They don't grow without someone pushing their direction in the right direction. And while, you need the right tools to work from in business development, if you have them, the sky's the limit. The sky's the limit. The limit is you, the business development person, and how far you're willing to push that company. But the reality is you might push that company to Microsoft. You might push that company to, I don't know, Starlink or something like that. And next thing you know, you're in a boardroom with someone like Elon Musk. You never know. It's really your limitations. It's only how far you're willing to go. And that's on you. And that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool that you can be that bar. You can be the person who says, you know what? I know that you only want to get to the Earth, but we're going to take you to space, right? That is really in the power of business development people. And that is pretty freaking cool. And of course, personal reward, right? We get fairly great pay. We get benefits. We get intrinsic goals. There's lots of benefits to just being in business development at most companies. So it's very, very awesome. And BD chooses you, and only the luckiest of individuals get to realize how special that is. And if you're listening to this today, that is you. You have the power to change the world with your BD skills. So go do it. That is the end of episode 55 of the Business Development Podcast. If you've enjoyed this show, please rate, follow, leave us a review. Greatly appreciated. We do a monthly community questions episode. You can shoot any questions you have to the show at podcast@capitalbd.ca. Shout outs this week: Justin Dio Narain, Daniel Altman Jr., Abby McCann, Sashin Jason Chakalakal, David Steffen, Lauren Cromie. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for the messages and kind words. Until next time, this has been the Business Development Podcast, and we will catch you on the flip side.
This has been the Business Development Podcast with Kelly Kennedy. Kelly has 15 years in sales and business development experience within the Alberta oil and gas industry and founded his own business development firm in 2020. His passion and his specialization is in customer relationship generation and business development. The show is brought to you by Capital Business Development, your business development specialists. For more, we invite you to the website at www.capitalbd.ca. See you next time on the Business Development Podcast.